What is love? What is love? You got some hints up there. It's a tough one to define, huh? Maybe you don't want to say it with your spouse or your girlfriend or whatever sitting next to you. Love is a battlefield. Right? Maybe that's what you're thinking right now. I don't know. What is love? Can't. Yeah, love is patient. Love is kind. Keeps no record of wrongs. I'm blanking on the rest of it too, so don't feel too bad. Yeah. What is love? Sorry, what was that? Kind of scary. Kindness and caring. Was that a Freudian thing? Kind of scary, right? You go back to middle school, oh, that's a scary thing, right? High school. Heck, it's always scary till you find it, right? And then sometimes it's scary trying to hold on to it. What else is love? A combination of emotion and action. Awesome. I like that. Right? Real love does something. You could say that another way. Like real love causes you to do something. Right? Sometimes doing something is real love. Right? It's not just necessarily that if you loved me, you'd really do this, but love causes you to do it. And the very act of choosing to love another is what love is. What does our culture say about love? Selfish, okay, or it should be, maybe, right? It's all about who? Me. I assumed that you meant it wasn't just about Kelly, but it was about me, right? Just in general, but maybe. So, mm, yeah, love is sex. That's what our culture says. And money, all right? Yeah. It's temporary. Yeah, explain that a little bit. How does our culture say it's temporary? Mm. Yeah, we fall in and out of love and we make our choices based off of what we feel in that moment, right? Yeah, how many movie stars have you seen on some talk show and say, yeah, I was married for 10 years, but we just grew apart, right? And it's totally natural. It's temporary, right? It's just what you feel in the moment, and if you stop feeling it, you're no longer in love. You're no longer with the person who is your true love. Maybe you missed him or her somehow, right? What else does our culture say about love? Anything else? That it's easy. You can just walk through it once you have it, right? Yeah, that's like Disney love right there, right? Happily ever after. Let's go sing with the birds in the field, kind of love. And that's how we're going to spend the rest of our days, soaking up the sunshine, right? Dancing in ballrooms, right? That's part of the problem, too. We think that there's a true love that we have as an individual in this world, someone that we're meant to be with, right? And so when things go wrong, we think, oh, I must have chosen the wrong person. Right? If you're married, you chose the right person, the Bible says. All right? There is no wrong or right person. The person becomes the right person when you make that vow before God. Right? People don't like that, though. But marriage is one of those things that kind of runs in and out of that idea of love. You know, sometimes when love is good, marriage should last. When love is absent, marriage should end. Or when you feel maybe not quite as connected or not quite served or not quite appreciated anymore, that marriage ends because the love apparently has ended, right? Here's some interesting statistics about marriage. These are all from Tim Keller's book, The Meaning of Marriage, right? If you liked last week when Megan was up here with me, Tim Keller wrote this book with his wife. It's amazing. If you want to improve your marriage or prepare for marriage, read that book. Tim Keller, The Meaning of Marriage. But he says, divorce rate has doubled since 1960. At that point, it was 25%. Today, it's at 50%. Right? And actually, it's even higher than that. These statistics were from 2008. In 1970, 89% of births were to married parents. Right? Today, it's 50%. Actually, this is, again, older statistics. I heard recently it was only 40% of children are born to married parents. 1960, 72% of adults were married. Today, only 50% are. So there's been a movement away from that in our culture, right? And a quarter of women today, between 25 and 39, are currently cohabitating with someone. And by late 30s, 60% of women will have. So you see like this great movement away from marriage to something else, right? And I think they cite women there because that's really the meter on society, right? You can talk about men, but you talk about women, you see exactly where we're at, you know. Why do you think, like seeing those statistics, why do you think people have moved away from this idea of marriage and towards this idea of cohabitation? Yeah. A lot of it's the government. Okay, how so? Mhm. Yeah, the government has changed a lot of things. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, so the government has moved away from the biblical idea of what marriage is, really a biblical foundation that was there in this country from the early days. So that's part of it. Yeah, you have no-fault divorce now. You know, divorce was hard to get. You kind of had to make your case on why the government should grant that. Today, it's just like, nah, don't feel like it anymore. You know, can be your excuse. I'm not saying that's the only reason, right? But it's really easy that way. And it used to be you'd get tax breaks and incentives because the government saw an interest in keeping a nuclear family together because they said that was the best place to raise kids. It was the best place to have economic growth, prosperity, so that you can raise and maintain healthy workers in this country and raise up the new population in a stable environment, right? Yeah. So that's all the government part. I added all that in there. But yeah, why else have we moved that way? Yeah, Randy? It's easier. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, so it comes down to that idea of love again, right? That if they don't know if they're going to stay with that person, it might be easier, right? If they're afraid to make that commitment, maybe, right? A little less hassle to get out of that relationship, right? Why else have we moved this way? Yeah, Larry.
Just the liberalization of sweeping our country.
Hmm.
Sweeping our country the last 10 years. It's put in no more consulting.
Yeah, so it's kind of just the shifting of the views of what love and marriage has been shifting further and further away from God's design here recently, especially in the last 5, 8 years. It has changed more than in the last 20, 30 years, really. Yeah.
Also, we've gotten away from having Christ-centered marriages, which comes from having a Christ-centered life.
Yeah.
You've got teenagers that are getting 75 hours worth of media that's telling them this is the worldview, and that this is okay. So it's starting very young
Mm-hmm.
to pull them away from Christ and keeping a Christ-centered life, and which ends up having a nation that's not a Christ-centered nation.
Yeah. When was the last time you saw a romance movie that didn't end up with a sex scene during the dating process? It's what our culture has just told us is natural, right? The media has just shaped our ways of thinking, where it just, you don't even think about it that way anymore, right? And so children especially, when they grow up seeing that, they think, okay, well, when's my turn for that? Right? Yeah, any other reason? Yeah, that's big. Yeah, a lot of people, they saw their parents in bad marriages, and that shaped their view of marriage. And they said, I don't want to be trapped like mom was or like dad was. And so they hide from that idea of marriage because they don't want to be stuck in the same problem that their parents maybe were in. Right? Right. And that's a shame. Right? It's a shame. But I don't know if the answer is abandoning marriage, but having a correct view of marriage. That's what I want to share with you today. Here are some, I guess you could add a couple more reasons, right? Some people, they don't get married because, well, quite frankly, they want to have sex with other people, right? They don't want to be limited to one person for the rest of their lives, and they want to have that easy transition to the next person, if they can find that person, right? And or they don't want to necessarily be, I guess, stuck taking care of someone if that person doesn't turn out to be the person that they hope, I guess, right? So they protect themselves, and so they cohabitate to test drive that relationship, right? See if that person is maybe has great sexual, romantic chemistry, right? Someone who's perfectly compatible. They won't change me. They'll accept me the way that I am, right? They'll affirm me. They'll not shackle me. They'll release me to be myself. They'll let me do everything I want to do, right? You're never going to marry someone if you're looking for someone like that, right? The mere act of marrying changes a person, right? So if you marry someone, that person's going to be a different person than they were before they said, I do. Because it changes the reality of who they are and who you are, right? Here are some facts that are about marriage. Actually, a number of recent studies have said cohabitating greatly increases the divorce rate. Something about living with someone for quite a while and then transitioning into marriage and really having no change other than a ceremony in your relationship, doesn't increase marriage or the longevity of marriage, but actually decreases it, and the chances of it ending are much higher, which is different than what the culture thinks. And I was talking to somebody about this a while back, and they said, well, maybe the reason why is because you have a conditional relationship before marriage, right? You're living together, and it's conditional. You're not committed. You're going to stay together as long as, right? As long as, they don't tick me off too bad, as long as they don't, show too many bad behaviors, right? As long as they always keep the checkbook right, as long as all these different things, and then suddenly you switch to having that commitment, having those rings on your finger, but you're still living in the same house that you were before. You're still interacting in the exact same way as before, and it's easy for that mentality to follow into your commitment, right, into your marriage. I'm sure that's not the only reason, but it made sense to me when this person was telling me that. Here's another fact. The earlier sex is introduced into a relationship, the sooner that relationship ends. Girls, you know this from high school. Right? As soon as a guy gets what he wants, he's gone a lot of times. But part of that, too, is the reason that you haven't built a relationship of trust and friendship. And then suddenly, you're exposed in the greatest way possible to them. You give yourself fully to them. And then, what's that bond that you have between each other when things go bad? Yeah, you had sex, and for the woman, that meant something. For the man, that's a conquest. It might have meant something and felt good, but it's easier for him to walk out because that's not a commitment to him. But most women feel like it was a commitment if they've walked into that situation, right? Here's another statistic. 2/3 of marriages that say they are unhappy, when checked back within 5 years, they report they're very happy. Right? And so just because you're unhappy and you're not having easy time figuring out how to live together and you're going to a rough spot doesn't mean that the marriage needs to end. Right? Most marriages correct themselves. But most people don't give it time. Right? 62% of married couples over the last 40 years have reported their married life as being very happy. Right? And that's not even just counting all the happy people or, yeah, it's pretty good, but they say very happy, very fulfilling, right? People who are married have a greater physical, mental, sexual, financial health, prosperity across the board. Across the board. Financially, it's one of the best moves you can make. Not that you don't want to just do that because of finances, but generally, overall, because God created that system, there's great benefits to it. And then finally, you guys have probably heard this, but children of married parents are 200 to 300% more success rate in life. So because they have a nurturing father and a mother who are committed to one another and who are regularly in their lives, they have a much greater success rate across the board. And what they're talking about is like the happiness in their own marriages, the success of their jobs, higher education, all of that kind of stuff. Now, we've heard all those statistics. Now, what's the purpose of marriage? Why do you think marriage exists? Maybe you guys are all floored by those statistics, but okay, God created marriage, right? When He made the woman, He made marriage, right? Adam and Eve are the first marriage. When God creates the woman, He brings her and presents her to Adam, right? The first daddy to give away his daughter. Yeah. What else? What's the purpose of marriage? Yeah, Kurt. The two should be one, right? It's the context for the sexual relationship, right? That's when they say the two shall become one flesh, right? Yeah. And so sex today is like really in the wrong place outside of marriage when you think about it. Sometimes people say, oh, the Bible confines sex and puts it in a place where it's not going to be as enjoyable or accessible. And Tim Chester said the confines on marriage is not to make it less enjoyable, but to make it more enjoyable and more healthy and more life-giving. And you take away those confines, you lose so much of what that sexual relationship was meant to be. He says it's kind of like the rocks at Niagara Falls, right? They confine that water, so it channels it together into a great tumult, rushing water of power, right, of intensity. And he says that's what the confines of marriage is meant to do, give a place where there's openness and freedom and acceptance and no fear of being rejected or scorned, right? And he says what our culture has done is turned it into some place with no confines, like the Mississippi Delta, that's wide and long and muddied and really watered down without much life, right? And it's kind of an interesting metaphor in the way that he paints it. You know, I've often said, you know, sex within a marriage is like a fire. Right? Fire is a good thing. It can be a harmful thing. Right? It's meant for my fireplace. If I have a fire in the house, if it's not in the fireplace, we have a problem. Right? It can destroy. It can be pretty dangerous. Right? But that sexual relationship was built for marriage. Yeah. There we go. That's where I am. So you can look at the purposes of marriage. You can say companionship, right? Procreation, right? He gave Adam and Eve the desire to be fruitful and multiply. He gave them the command to. And then he gives them the context in which to do that in that marriage relationship. Of course, you can't make it just about procreation, otherwise your kids will become your idol, become your God. All right? You can't make it just about companionship, because then your spouse will become your God, become what life revolves around. Right? It can be about protection, right? But protection, it can't just be about protection as well. But protection's a big part of it. If it's just about protection, then you're looking for that spouse, that husband or wife, to do what only God can do. Right? Secure your future and your hope and your good. Right? And then finally, marriage is meant to tell a story. Right? That's a key overlining thing of everything. Right? So you think about two couples, right? Gary and Sue. Maybe they're having sex on their third date. Right? And across town, you've got Tim and Sally, and they're having sex for the first time on their wedding night. Right, 3 weeks later, both of them are in a big fight. I mean, a big fight. How are both of them going to be looking at their relationship at that point and what they did 3 weeks beforehand? Right, with the one, they don't know if that fight's going to end. Right, if they gave themselves to each other fully, but it could end in a moment. Right, but the one has, a deep connection, a commitment to one another, to love each other forever, right? And so there's a greater security in that one because they haven't just committed their bodies to one another, but their lives, right? And so what they gave to one another can't be taken back. Right? And so there's a protection there. The difference is a covenant. Right? The Bible talks about covenants, and usually they're between God and humanity. And in the Bible, that it calls marriage a covenant too. A covenant's not just a contract, right? We sometimes call that piece of paper, that marriage certificate, just a contract. Why do I need that? Well, you want somewhat of a contract, right? Somewhat of a commitment that you're going to stay together so you can be naked and unashamed. You can be vulnerable. You don't have to constantly be painting the fence so everybody thinks that you're okay, more perfect than you are. Right? You can let your guard down with a covenant, with a contract. Right? Without that, you're always trying to impress. You're still afraid to be completely vulnerable, right? But a covenant's not just a cold business deal, right? It's a contract of love. The Hebrew word for this is kesed. I don't use Hebrew words much, but this word means steadfast love, covenantal love. So a lot of times if you read the Psalms, they talk about God's steadfast love, his covenantal love, a love that never gives up, never fails, never quits trying, right? And that's how God sees us in his covenant and his love through the covenant, and that's what the covenant between man and woman was called to be, right? And so it's not just, we're not just called to keep feeling in love, because you won't always feel in love with your husband or your wife or boyfriend or girlfriend, but you're called to keep being in love. You're called to keep striving towards that. Right? Love is more of an action than emotion. And all of us want that, right? All of us deep down want to be loved by someone who will always love us. All of us want to say that, don't we? You know, when you meet that special someone and you're in that dating relationship, I don't know about you, but a couple of times, the love word just popped out of my mouth before I was really ready to say it or put myself out there, and I was like, I love being with you. Or tacos. Why are you talking about tacos? Let's go get tacos. We just ate. No, I'm hungry again. You try to cover it up. But part of us just want to express that word love. And when we're feeling the intensity of that emotion, you want to say, I'll always love you. Because we know deep down that love was meant to last forever. In the good times and in bad. Right? In sickness and in health. It was meant to last forever. And part of us knows that we're afraid of it because love leaves us vulnerable. Right? But the beauty of a covenant here is in the covenant of marriage, if you've ever noticed what happens, is that the couple, as they stand before the pastor, the first people that they confess the promise to is who? The pastor, actually. Because the pastor says, will you take this woman to be your wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, and till death do you part? If so, say, I will. Right? And they're not looking at each other at that point. They're looking at the pastor. And the idea is that they are promising before God. They're making a covenant with God, not the pastor. But as the pastor asks on God's behalf, they're promising God, right? They confess before God and those witnesses that show up that day. And then the wife does that too, take her husband, and then they turn around and face each other, or turn to the side and face each other, and they confess to one another. So there's a vertical aspect of the covenant, that it's before God, and a horizontal, and it's between each other. And when you truly understand marriage in a Christian sense, then you realize this isn't just a contract I take lightly. I didn't just promise someone that has ticked me off now and gets mad at me or nags at me or doesn't appreciate me or whatever, and I'm done. Because I didn't just promise that person, but I promised God. And I'm asking God to be my witness, and then ultimately God to help me, right? to help me in the midst of the difficult times. So a couple other things real quick. We'll go through this quickly, but with marriage, it's a promise. Sex is the handshake on that promise. When you think about it that way, right? When you consummate your marriage, right? In the Catholic Church, they'll annul your marriage if you haven't had sex yet, because they say you haven't fully become husband and wife yet until that moment, right? And so it's God's gift to say, this is how I'm committed to you. This is how much I desire to stay with you, because I'm giving you myself to you in the most intimate way. I'm revealing myself to you in a way that no one else gets to see. No one else gets to experience. And that's why in the Bible, like sometimes they use this metaphor of knowing someone. You know, when it shows up when Cain goes into a certain land, and it says in there he knew his wife, right? Talking about a sexual relationship. There he came to know her in the deep way. He married her and took her to himself, right? And so it's that contract, right? It's that final handshake. It's not just a pleasurable activity. It creates a new reality, right? Two become one flesh, right? Your middle school teacher said, hey, you sleep with one person, you've slept with everyone they've slept with. Remember that? You know, that's true to a certain degree, right? But every time you've connected with somebody like that, in a way you have said, I am with you forever. You might not have realized you've said that, but that's what that act has done. It's bonded you together with that person forever in a way that you don't realize until you remember it, right? You might realize it when something comes out to your current boyfriend or girlfriend, or to your husband or your wife, right? And then suddenly you realize how you did bind yourself to someone else before, when that comes up and causes a difficulty in your current relationship or your marriage, right? Tim Chester says this: you can no more try out sex or marriage than you can birth. Right? It creates a new reality. It changes things. So it's serious. The final thing here is that it tells a story. Right? The marriage relationship, love, was always meant to tell a story, meant to tell the story of God's sacrificial and selfless love. Right? Throughout this story here, well, first off, the first few pages has a wedding and a bride and a groom, and the last few pages has a wedding and a bride and a groom. Right? In the beginning, it's Adam and Eve. At the end, it's God and his people. Right? And in the New Jerusalem, God's redeemed people come to him like a bride coming down the aisle. Right? And they're dwelling. The dwelling place with God is with man. Right? They're living together. They moved in. And they're bonded forever. Right? And throughout this story, you see God calling to the people of Israel. He's calling them his bride. He's calling them his wife. When they run away from him and worship other gods, God uses this language of them being an unfaithful bride, like a prostitute going after anyone that they can find. They even compare Israel to being like a wild she-donkey or camel or something, sniffing the winds of the desert, looking for another mate, right? But continually, God calls Israel back and says, I loved you. You know, and you betrayed me even though I was a husband to you, even though I cared for you since your youth, even though I loved you in the deepest and richest ways. You went looking for other things to fulfill you, other things to make you whole, other things to protect you. And God calls humanity back to him and says, those things are nothing. They might promise a lot and they might make you feel good, but ultimately the only one who can protect you is me. The only one who can fill you with their love is me. The only one who can make you whole and give you security and give you an everlasting future is me. Return to your proper husband, and I'll protect you, and I'll love you, and I'll forgive you for everything. Right? And so then you even have then Ephesians 5, which we've read actually the last 2 weeks. We'll go back to it again, Ephesians 5:25. It says, "For husbands," this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. He's talking about people, right? Not a building. And he says he gave his life for her to make her holy and clean, washed by the cleansing of God's word. And he did this to present her to himself as a glorious church without spot or wrinkle or any other blemish. Instead, she will be holy and without fault. Right? And the idea is that she's been living on the streets. Right? She's wearing torn up pantyhose, standing on a corner looking for any man she could get. Giving herself away freely. That's the church. That's humanity. And God was searching all those streets, looking at all those girls, looking for His. And He called humanity back to Him. And He took the punishment. And this is becoming a really weird analogy, but He took the punishment. It's like the pimp killed him so she could get away. Right? He was willing to lay down His life. And He cleansed her. He washed her clean. He gave her new clothes. Let her get her hair done. Sent her to the beautician, the spa. And brought her home as a beautiful, spotless bride. Right? That's the love God has for you and us. You and me. For all of us. Right? He claimed us. He remade us as His own. Right? And so as we said before, this is like a beautiful thing that the husband gets to play, the Jesus role of laying down his life for his wife, of protecting his wife even if it kills him, doing everything he can within his power as the head of the family to not lord it over her, but to serve her and to love her till the end. Right? But what's cool is that the woman gets to play the Jesus role too. Right? We talked last week and the week before that term submission, what that meant. So if I don't explain it clearly enough for you, don't get upset. Go check out the last 2 weeks worth of messages. And you'll love it, especially last week while my wife shared that. But that submission was always supposed to be in a place where she allows her husband to be the head to protect her, to do its best to keep her safe and to make her beautiful, and to, in essence, be like a shade that protects a little plant from the scorching heat so that it's able to grow into the fullness of what it was meant to be. Right? And so a couple pages after this in Philippians 2, it says, though He was God, talking about Jesus. This is like one of the earliest hymns or statements of faith in the Bible. It says, though He was God, He did not think equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, He gave up His divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave, was born as a human being, and when He appeared in human form, He humbled Himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on the cross. And therefore God elevated Him to a place of highest honor and gave Him the name above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, both in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And so, like, Jesus plays that submission role too. I mean, He does it to a degree that no woman's ever called to. But when you live in a way that allows your husband to lead, you're being very Christ-like. As an equal, right? And it says Jesus was equal with the Father, but He let go of that and let Him protect Jesus. And while He was brought low, then it says the Father then lifted up Jesus above every name And isn't that what true biblical marriage is supposed to look like? Husband not lording it over the wife and saying, you are my servant, you are my slave, you do what I don't want to do, and you do what I like, and I'm up here. But I'm over you so I can protect you as the head and teach you God's ways and to lead you and to help you to become everything you were meant to be. And so I will lift you up and serve you. And the wife then serves her husband. And so both then have a beautiful picture of the gospel. And you get to, that's a story you get to tell in your marriages. Real quick, I want to talk to everybody else who's not married, who was married. The Bible says that husband and wives are given as helpers to one another to accomplish the mission. The Bible also says, Paul especially will say, some people shouldn't be married. And some people, their singleness is an opportunity to serve in ways that in their married state they couldn't do. Right? You think about it, if you don't have kids you have to look out for, you don't have a husband you have to be home for, or a wife you have to be home for, you're much freer to serve and to love and to witness to God. And so there's a great opportunity there in singleness. And then regardless of whether you're married or single, there's a story being told in every aspect of your relationships. Right? And every aspect of your relationships, in the relationships that God designed, was meant to point to Him. Right? So if you've experienced the joy of marriage, you know something about the companionship of God and His people. Right? If you've ever experienced the longing of singleness, right, you know something about the need we have for God. And that's a story that's meant to be told through your singleness. Right? If you've ever had the pain of betrayal, you know something of God's holy jealousy and love for His people. Think about that. You get to tell a story of that God who calls back His wayward bride, His church, His people. Right? If you've ever felt passion towards another, whether that's accepted or rejected, you know something about God's passion for His people, to be with them and to enrich their lives. So remember, God's marriage is a gift, but also God's marriage, God always intended to tell a greater story of His love for each and every one of you, for this entire world. And so as we live within our relationships, or even in our singleness, pay attention to the story that you're telling. Right? Are you telling a different story than the one that I outlined today? A different story than what God is saying? Right? Or are you telling the story of God's love for His people? Tell the story of His bride who was finally brought back home and finds a place by her husband's side. Right? We all have that story we can tell. And if we're not telling those stories, let His story inform yours. Right? Remember the way that you've been loved. And when you do that, when you remember the way that God's loved you, that frees you then to love fully someone else, even if they don't deserve it. Even if they squandered that opportunity. You can still love fully, even if you're never loved back, because you know that you have a love that you'll never lose in God.